This is my fourth installment of Tolkien versus Tech, where I talk about Peter Thiel's Lord of the Rings inspired companies and how he and so many other tech bros have just completely missed the point of the fantasy franchise. Today we're going to talk about hiding things, specifically assets. As always, nerd stuff first. There are two main elven refuges in Middle-earth, one on either side of the Misty Mountains. The first is Rivendell, which is guarded by Elrond. Elrond wields the elven ring Vilya, also known as the Ring of the Air, and it is set with a sapphire. It is the most powerful of the three elven rings and wards off decay and dilapidation. Rivendell likewise was known for its timelessness. Elves in Rivendell existed much as they had in the First and Second Age, in all of their power and glory, and were not nearly as weary of Middle-earth as their elvish brethren who existed in other places of Middle-earth, with the exception of Lothlorien. Lothlorien is the other refuge, and that was under the command of Galadriel. Galadriel is a Noldor who was born in Valinor, so she is actually one of the High Elves. As previously discussed, Galadriel wields the elven ring Nenya, or the Ring of Adamant. It is behind much of the protective and sustaining power of Lothlorien. And this includes the technologies that are developed within Lothlorien. There are many ropes and boats and other objects of craft, and one of the other technologies they developed was Lembas, or the Elvish Waybread. It had a supernatural ability to stay fresh and edible, especially when it was wrapped in Malorn leaves, which is the tree of Lothlorien. Which brings us to Peter Thiel and his versions of Rivendell and Lembas. Peter Thiel's Rivendells, there are three known so far, 1, 7, and 25, and then Lembas LLC are what are called holding companies, or holdcos. Holdcos do not produce anything like other companies. Instead, they hold on and usually protect assets. You can use holdcos for a variety of reasons, like tax deferrals, estate planning, and firewalling assets from other businesses. Hashtag, this is not legal advice. I am not a lawyer or a tax accountant, and there are exceptions to all of these generalities. Holdcos can also be held in anonymous shell companies. It's like Russian dolls of wealth. In Middle-earth, Rivendell and Lothlorien were extremely well guarded and very difficult to find. Likewise, holding companies can be very difficult to suss out. Often you have to wait for a taxable event to occur to expose a holding company. This is how the wealthy can engage in typically legal tax evasion. Current US law does not tax anything in a holding company unless a taxable event occurs, usually the selling of stock or taking a dividend. But you can also do consolidated tax returns for holding companies and their subsidiaries within their shell companies, for instance, and their various gains and losses could actually offset each other, which lowers your tax liability. To put this in perspective, we'll take one transaction from one holding company of Peter Thiel's. In 2024, Rivendell 7, one of Peter Thiel's holding companies, sold 12 million shares of his Palantir stock for about $457 million. At the time, over 30 million shares of Palantir remained in Rivendell 7. But since there's not been another public filing since then, we have no idea what remains and how much it's worth. Now multiply this one instance of wealth that is very difficult to track across 3,000 billionaires worldwide. This is why the Biden administration injected $80 billion into the IRS through the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. It was specifically to step up enforcement activities for high net worth individuals and companies because their tax situations are so complex. Their entities, while usually perfectly legal, can be very difficult to sort through and very difficult to audit. The IRS estimated they would have been able to collect an additional $851 billion. We're talking almost $1 trillion of additional tax revenue due to these stepped up enforcements. You'll recall that the Big Beautiful Bill cut over $1 trillion of funding from Medicaid and SNAP. So it should enrage you to know that since 2022, Congress has gutted most of that $80 billion investment. It should also enrage you to know that the current House Appropriations Bill for FY26 has a 23% cut to the current IRS funding. All this does is strains the IRS's ability to collect taxes from the wealthy and their elven havens of assets. Considering the IRS was literally founded to go after mob bosses and the wealth they had accumulated through less than savory means, we've fallen a bit from grace. As I've said before, Tolkien was a master of world building because he created a universe made of mostly neutral elements, powers, and locations. It was up to the will of the wielders and stewards of those same elements, lands, and powers to decide if it was for good or evil. Sauron used his One Ring of Power to create a massive wasteland of volcanic ash. Elrond and Galadriel created havens of peace and technological advancement. Now, if billionaires want to spread their assets across a variety of holding companies and LLCs, they can knock themselves out. It's perfectly legal. But we need to respond with sensible legislation and appropriations to ensure that we can tax them appropriately, especially when they make the majority of their wealth through that same appropriations process, as in our tax dollars, and through the labor force of the people who need the services those appropriations provide. This way we can create havens that are well-resourced for all peoples, and not just the wielders of the rings of power. Next episode, we're going to be covering Narya, which is JD Vance's venture capital firm. This has been a big request from y'all, so stay tuned.